down around verse 6. Did we get behind on our study questions last week? If we did, we'll make it up tonight, Lord willing. We're going to begin with a prayer. If you bow your heads, please. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for this day, for this hour. We can come together to study your word, and we ask your richest blessings upon us as we so do. Pray, Father, for Brother Jim Hogan's wife, Wanda, that you would be with her, and we pray for her recovery and back to good health once again. Look down upon us to your kindness and mercy, O God, and bless your church in a great way. Help us to continue to grow and be a strong servants of yours in your kingdom. And Father, we pray your blessings upon us tonight as we have come together to study your word. Help us to grow in our faith, that our lives may be more profitable in your service. In Christ's name we pray, amen. Song of Solomon. If you had to put a word on the book, The Song of Solomon, what would you put on it? Well, that's a good one, I think. Gilbert sure do. And there's a thing. First section of the book that we just finished looking at through chapter 3, verse 5, there it talks about the courtship of the bride and the bride-to-be. Who is the bride-to-be? Okay. All right. In context. I've heard something about that context word. Okay. The Shulamite lady, yeah, she is the bride-to-be, isn't she? Who's going to be the groom? Solomon is. So Solomon is going to be the groom. We have a very beautiful picture, I think, in the Song of Solomon. It talks about the idea of the relationship, the love between really the husband and the wife, as God would have us to be, and see the holy nature of it that God puts it forth for us. And so we've looked through basically some of the first parts of this, where the bride is spoken and where Solomon praises her beauty and she praises the king, and they're trying to outdo each other, it seems like, and giving their praise to each other, doesn't it? And that's not going to stop for a while either. And mutual admiration society in a good way. She describes herself as the rose of Sharon, and so on down in chapter 2 talks about the bride sings the praises of her beloved, and then a visit to the Shulamite's abode during the day made by Solomon, of course, and she sings his love, and he arrives there, and we talked about that some last week in the process. Chapter 2, verses 10 through 15, he calls her to come forth from her house, and then chapter 2, verse 16 is an interesting verse, and so let's go back and just take a quick peek at it, where it talks about the devotion that they really have one to the other there. He says, "My beloved is mine, and I am his. He feedeth among the lilies." What do you mean he feedeth among the lilies? She just got through saying she was a lily, didn't she? You think one thing we remember about the Song of Solomon, a couple of things, is number one, it's a poetic book, which means a form of poetry, and so it's given to poetic expression. We think that's important to do it. And the idea is the expressions here take on the nature of figurative language somewhat, but then again, it takes on the nature really a very deep and specific devotion that Solomon has when he has come into acquaintance with this Shunammite girl from the northern country up there. And one writer suggested probably about 50 miles from Jerusalem up to where the Shulamite woman lives as such. And so they fall in love. In fact, one place she says, "I'm sick with love." And so that's the thing. So chapter 3, she seeks her love, and seems like maybe a dream. In her search, she talks about the night on my bed. I sought him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. She says, I'll rise now and go about the city and the streets, and in the broad ways I'll seek him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. And it talks about in verse 3, the watchman that goeth about the city found me In whom I said, saw ye him of whom my soul loveth? It was but a little that I passed from them, and found him whom my soul loveth. I held him, and would not let him go, till I had brought him unto my mother's house, and into the chamber of her that conceived me. And I charge you, O daughters, and there's that expression we found at least 3 times or more in the book of Ecclesiastes. I charge you, O you daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that you stir not up, nor awake my love, till he pleases. And we talked about the idea that this has a good likelihood of having reference to whom? Who? Well, I know, but what about the daughters of Jerusalem?
All those that missed the call.
Do what? Yeah, her court, her attendants, her maids, various ways. And that seems to be the case. And, of course, once she becomes acquainted with Solomon, she would have that sort of thing available to her. Perhaps not when she was up keeping the vineyard up in the northern country. But life seemed to improve. Do what, Carmen? Yeah, nobody said don't, yeah. We find the expression several times also in the book of Solomon here. It says, by the roes and by the hinds of the field that you stir. What about this side? By the roes and by the hinds of the field. Who are the roes? Huh? Do what?
The roe is a female goat, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And they're very shy. And they're very shy, both of them. It doesn't take much. It's been at least 3 or 4 days since I almost ran over one of those critters right out in front of you. And that's the idea. So we come to chapter 3 and verse 6. We enter into the second part of this thing according to one outline that we have, which says the king's praise. If you have the word prize there, I'd change it to praise. The king's praise for the bride. This goes all the way through the first verse of chapter 5. And so the first part of this in chapter 3, this talks where the king is going to arrive. And he's going to arrive in a notable fashion. Let's see what it says beginning in verse 6. Who is this that cometh out of the wilderness like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all powders of the merchants? Behold, his bed, which is Solomon's, 80 valiant men are about it, of the valiant of Israel. They all hold swords, being expert in war. Every man hath his sword upon his thigh, because of fear in the night. King Solomon made himself a chariot of the wood of Lebanon. He made the pillars thereof of silver, the bottom thereof of gold, the covering of it of purple, the midst thereof being paved with love for the daughters of Jerusalem. Go forth, ye daughters of Zion, and behold King Solomon. Look at where it says in verse 12, with the crown wherewith his mother crowned him in the day of his espousals, plural, and in the day of the gladness of his heart. So, what about this idea of the king coming here in this great way here? It talks about coming, wilderness like pillars of smoke. We might, there's be another way like stirring up what when you go through dusty road. And you could see him coming and that sort of thing. I like the idea when it talks about pillars perfumed with myrrh and frankincense. What about this expression, with all powders of the merchants? What do you think the powders of the merchants would be? More perfume, myrrh, more, more good smelling stuff, I think the idea. And talks about his bed in verse 7, which is Solomon's, and so let's see what else it said. In verse 9 it says Solomon made himself a what? Chariot. So his bed we would think would be that would have reference to that in which he was riding, which would be his chariot. And of course, you would think it would be a very comfortable thing to try. And not only that, he's very well protected, is he not? How many men has he got going about with him? Yeah, that's his, what do you call that? Huh?
60.
That's his protection. That's his secret service, isn't it? And 60 men, they're well protected. They have swords. It says that they, because of the fear of the night. Fear of the night probably simply indicates what? Danger. To protect against the possibility of it. And so he made himself a chariot. The wood of Lebanon. What's so special about the wood of Lebanon? Yeah, very good. In fact, that's where they went to get the wood to make the temple out of, and where they used it, wasn't it? So good. And he made the pillars, and so the framework seemed to be made of silver. The bottom of it seemed to be gold. That's right, in pretty high class now. Covering of it in purple, in the midst thereof being paved with love for the daughters of Jerusalem. I don't think the expression love for the daughters of Jerusalem would have reference to immoralities as such. The daughters of Jerusalem probably simply having reference, according to our notes, the people of Jerusalem. You know, they're exhorted to behold the king. And verse 12, it talks about when they go forth and they behold or they see King Solomon with his crown, wherewith who crowned him? Verse 12, who crowned him? His mother. Who was his mother? Bathsheba. This is the last mention of Bathsheba, except there is a mention in the genealogy, I think, in Matthew chapter 1. There, so. I wonder how many times Bathsheba had to go to weddings for that fellow. So I say maybe it's kind of an interesting thought for me anyway. So here comes chapter 4. Now, if you want to learn how to be complimentary to your wife and loved ones, here's Solomon going to teach us how to do it here now. Okay, let's see what he said. First 5 verses talks about her beauty here and how it's described. Here's how he says it. Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair. Thou hast dove's eyes within thy lock, and hair like a flock of goats, which is really a high compliment, because it's very good. That appear from Mountain Gilead, a very special breed. No, obviously a thing there as such, and a very special breed. So, and so within thy locks, perhaps behind thy veil, is ASV reading on that. Teeth are like a flock of sheep that are even shorn, which means what? They're nice and white, and they're even shorn. They're not broken up. They're all smooth up there. They came up, boy, every one bears twins. None is barren among them. That means they're exactly what on one side you have on the other side. Teeth are absolutely perfect. And lips like a thread of scarlet. An interesting thing. So shining, glistening, red color. Speech, verse 3. It's comely. And she is conversationally pleasant. Temples are like a piece of pomegranate with the locks therein in the process. Pomegranate, probably having reference simply to the reddish color, the healthy color of the temple. Neck. Ain't like somebody say, well, your neck's like the Tower of David. Her neck was like the Tower of David, builded for an armory, whereon there hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. So you got an armory, you can put that much hardware in. What does that say about that armory? It is formidable, isn't it, in the process? And so I think that's what he's talking about there. And they're splendid in strength and ornament. And so the neck is just like that. And 2 breasts are like 2 young roes that are twins, there you go, which feed among the lilies. And so again you have the perfection and form there. And so verse 6, he expresses his desire to be in her presence. Here's what he says. Until the day break and the shadows flee away. I will get me into the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense wise. And so, we're talking about getting in the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense is probably having reference to the place where she lives, descriptive of her native land, which is known for its produce of myrrh and frankincense, and also probably, descriptive of her fragrance. She is well presented. And so here's what he says about her in verse 7. Verse 7. Thou art all fair, my love. There is no spot in thee. You are perfect. And so that was Solomon's estimate of his life, the one who he favored so greatly. And so he makes a plea there. He invites her to leave her home here, beginning about verse 8 in chapter 7 of chapter 4. Come with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top of Shinar, and Hermon, from the lion's den, and from the mountains of the leopards. And so she, from tops of the high peaks where she could do, go and look over all the land, perhaps, which the king rules over, if you will. Look what he says in verse 11. Thou hast ravished my heart. Then he says, my sister, my spouse. Thou hast ravished my heart with one of thine eyes, with one chain of thy neck. What about this idea of my sister, my spouse? That's not the first, not the only time. Over chapter 5 and verse 1, we have the same thing. What about this idea? Paul says, my sister. We understand the spouse. What do you think, Gilbert?
Like I would call,
yeah.
One of the females.
Yeah, just really enhances the relationship between the two, I think, probably is the idea. Yeah, probably. Ravish my heart. Wow. Solomon, you talk being found in love head over heels. I believe Solomon was there, don't you? Just with one of your eyes, with a chain of your neck. Don't know too much about the idea of the chain of your neck round about as such, but probably just the appearance, and maybe someone suggests maybe some jewelry or something like that, but Shulamite woman, just all, how fair, he says in verse 10, is thy love, my sister, my spouse. How much better is thy love than wine, and the smell of thine ointments than all spices. And so her smell was better than the smell of everybody else, even though they probably had on the same thing. Yeah. Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb, honey and milk are under thy tongue, and the smell of thy garments is like the smell of Lebanon. Well, Lebanon getting a kick out of this thing. What do you mean, like the smell of Lebanon? Lebanon was known, as we just mentioned, for what? Great timbers, its trees, and you ever been out in the woods where these great trees are? It has really a unique, pleasant smell. And just nothing like it, really. When I was a younger fellow, we used to like to just get out and walk up on the mountain, see where we could go and if we could get anywhere. And look at verse 12. He says, a garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse. Then he used another expression, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Well, if your garden is enclosed and your spring is shut up and your fountain is sealed, what does that mean? Huh? Her clothing? Or perhaps the idea that she's not available. She's not available to anything else. So if you got your garden shut up, nobody get in. If you got your spring is shut up, nobody's going to be able to get access to it. And if you got your fountain sealed up, Solomon says, she's mine, I'm not going to share. I would think at least that'd be a thought in that particular area there. And something to think about. So on down verse 13, she's the garden of his desires here. In verse says, thy plants are like an orchard of pomegranates, which with pleasant fruits, camphor and spikenard. So she is totally and completely pleasant in every particular way. Pomegranates are good things, what have you, so it's a very desirable thing. Spikenard, saffron, calamus, and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all the chief spices. Pretty well covers it, doesn't it? Verse 15, she says, a fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and streams from Lebanon. So what does that say about her? She's the garden of desires, and she's just filled with precious fruits and spices. She is everything you can think about to compare her to. She is the highest estimate of that thing. So this is what he says in verse 16, awake, O north wind, and come thou south, blow upon my garden, that the spices thereof may flow out. Let my beloved come into his garden and eat his pleasant fruits as such. So it seems like in verse 16 is where she's accepting the invitation that is given. Blow upon my garden. That would be, we think, perhaps the Shulamite, the spices that may flow out, And so let my beloved come into his garden and eat of his pleasant fruits. So she invites him in, and she says basically, I am his. Chapter 5 and verse 1, and she says, I am coming. He says, I am coming to my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine with my milk. Eat, O friends, drink, yea, drink abundantly, and beloved. O beloved. So his joy is complete, and that's probably just a good symbolic way of expressing the great joy that he has. And she is mine, he says as such. So let's begin at chapter 5 and verse 2 and look at the idea of a second romantic dream. We looked at one a little earlier where she saw him. And so let's see if we can look at a second one here. And so they may end up being separated, it seems like. So, I sleep, but my heart waketh. It is the voice of my beloved that knocketh, saying, open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled, for my head is filled with dew, and my locks are locks with the drops of night. So what is she picturing? What's he doing? He's standing where? At the door knocking and wanting to get in. I put off my coat, how shall I put it on? I have washed my feet, how shall I defile them? My beloved put in his hand by the hole of the door, whatever that is, and my bowels removed for him, she said. So she rose up. She heard him. And she said, my hands dropped with myrrh, my fingers were sweet-smelling myrrh upon the handles of the lock. So she opened the door. Guess what? Huh? She's not there. I opened my door, but my beloved hath withdrawn himself, verse 6. Was gone. My soul fell. When he spake, I sought him, and I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. Look at verse 7. She's searching for a husband. The watchmen that went about the city found me, and what did they do? Smote me. Why would they smote this Shulamite girl? Well, I don't know about it. Maybe just the fact that she had been out at night by herself like that, she may not have presented herself. And, they would not know her as well as Solomon did, for sure, if you will. They wounded me. The keepers of my walls took away my veil from me. Seemed like they roughed her up pretty good. And so here's what she says in verse 8. She says, again, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my love, that you tell him that I am sick of love. Tell him I am lovesick. One. Daughters of Jerusalem raise the question, why? What is thy beloved more than another beloved? O thou fairest among women. What is thy beloved more than another beloved, that thou dost so charge us? So these who address her as the fairest among women, her care, her attendants, they look at her and she said, why is he any more or any better than anybody else? So, well, her answer is where she goes through, and now she's going to praise him. Now remember, we talked about his praise for her, and back early part of chapter 4, and she's going to do some praise for him. And so, verse 10, my beloved is white and ruddy, the chiefest among 10,000. His head is as the most fine gold. His locks are bushy, black as a raven. His eyes are as the eyes of doves by the rivers of waters, washed with milk and fitly set. His cheeks, verse 13, are as a bed of spices, as sweet flowers. His lips like lilies, dropping sweet-smelling myrrh. His hands, 14, are as gold rings set with a beryl. His belly is as bright ivory overlaid with sapphires. And his legs are pillars of marble set upon sockets of fine gold. His countenance is as Lebanon, excellent as the cedars, which Lebanon is known for. And his mouth is most sweet, yea, he is altogether lovely. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. That's her order, that's her answer, response to the daughters of Jerusalem. Says why? And so she's paid pretty good attention to Solomon, hadn't she? Talked about his complexion, white. He talked about his head, hair, eyes, cheeks, lips, hands, his belly, legs, his general countenance. She had him sized up pretty good, didn't she? In the process. And there's a really great prayer, and she poetically describes Solomon here in really a great way. Let's turn to chapter 6 and verse 1. So the daughters of Jerusalem. Whither is thy beloved gone, O thou fairest among women? Whither is thy beloved turned aside, that we may seek him with thee? My beloved is gone down into his garden, to the beds of spices, to feed in the gardens, and to gather lilies. And I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine, and he feedeth among the lilies. Various thoughts, as indicated in your notes, there have been suggested on this. Perhaps the simplest, that she simply identifies herself as his garden, expressed back in chapter 4, 12 through 15, and that she is simply waiting for him to come and to partake of the fruits thereof, or her love. She knows that her husband is hers and she is his, verse 3. So that's another one of those key verses in the book of Solomon, Song of Solomon there. Good things to think about in the process. And
So previously to this point,
say what? Give her.
previous to this point, they were talking one of another in long context, and now they're having interaction, conversation.
Well, it's kind of sometimes hard to pick out just exactly, whether Solomon's coming to see her, or whether she's going to accept his invitation and go with him to Jerusalem, and that sort of things. And so, but when they're apart like that, obviously you can kind of pick that up pretty easily because of the concern that they follow therein. And so when it comes back to chapter 6, we find that the bride now is going to find the king, and he's going to praise her for her beauty, as if he hadn't done enough already. So chapter 10, and beginning on down about chapter 6, beginning on down about verse 6, and really going through the end of the book, we're going to have a great emphasis upon the beauty of the Shulamite. Let's see what it says beginning in chapter 6 and verse 4, where it says, her beauty is variously described. This goes all the way down through verse 9, where it says, thou art beautiful, O my love, as Tirzah, comely as Jerusalem, terrible as an army of banners. That's something that describes something, isn't it? So, Tirzah seemed to be a city in Ephraim, according to our notes, was known for its beauty. And it says she's as terrible as an army with banners. What about this bride of his love being one as terrible as an army with banners? Perhaps that's the idea in there. So. And her beauty, you see, it's an overwhelming picture. This army is just kind of an overwhelming picture. And so the pulpit commentary says it's like a warring host with flying banners going forth to victory. So, and so.
You know as well as I do, coming man to man, when a man is with her, he can conquer the world.
Okay. All right. Let's look at 5 through 7. This won't be new to us. It's turn away thine eyes, for they have overcome me. Just to look at him got him. Thy hair again is like a flock of what? Goats that appear from Gilead. Teeth as a flock of sheep which go up from the washing, whereof every one beareth twins, which means you're identical on both sides. There's not one barren, there's none missing, if you will. As a piece of pomegranate are the temples within thy locks. And that goes back over some of the expression back in chapter 4, first 5 verses, where he gave a description of his bride there in the process. Look at verse 8. It talks about there are 80 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. Would that give us any indication relative to the time of Solomon's reign when he wrote this word? Earlier, wouldn't it? Because he ended up with how many queens? 700, 300 concubines. And so at this point, he's just only up to 80. Only up to 80 and 80. So, wow. Makes you wonder sometimes. It's we stop and we think about that, and we're amazed about that when you go back and think about, again, looking back at the history of Israel. And Brother Harrison mentioned some of this, what have you, is the fact that the relationships between nations, what have you, and the concept of the, if I'm going to have an alliance with this country over here, then I'll just give my daughter or somebody. And so Solomon was the number one power in the world at that time, so he seemed to get more than his share, didn't he? If that be the case, how he got them. Verses 10 through 13 talks about her overwhelming effect on him. And so here going on down through chapter 7 talks about the bride and her companions. And so here's what it says, beginning in verse 10. And 9, let's get 9. My dove, my undefiled is but one. She is the only one of her mother. She is a choice one that bare her. The daughters saw her and blessed her, yea, the queens and the concubines, and they praised her. So however that went together, watch that, when these queens and concubines were, I guess, introducing some compassion to her, then they had deep respect for her in the process. And so, verse 10 talks about, who is she that looketh forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners. There you go again, just overwhelming. And so he says, I went down into the garden of nuts of the fruits of the valley, and to see whether the vine flourisheth and the pomegranates budded. Or ever I was aware, my soul made me like the chariots of Amminadab. And seems to be here that Solomon, it just reflects, he just basically overcome in the process there. And so he talks about going down to the garden and that sort of thing in verse 11. Perhaps the one thought is perhaps referencing when he made a visit to the northern country where the Shulamite lived, and where he went into her presence and that sort of thing. Chapter 12 is got some difficulties with it when he says, ever I was aware, before I was aware, my soul made me like the chariots of Amminadab. Well, what's he talking about? On that statement in your notes there, got some, uncertain. Some think reference to Israel, others to the individual. Latter part of that passage in there is where I put this idea in. And our thoughts, if our thoughts on the verses are correct that we just looked at, and this simply would be an appropriate proverbial statement describing the swiftness of Solomon's falling in love with the Shulamite. That being the case, by implication, then, that would be the case that the chariots of Amminadab would be known for their swiftness. So he wants to return with me. Return, verse 13. Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon thee. What will ye see in the Shulamite? As it were, the company of two armies. And again, it seems to have that same sort of impact in the process. And so her beauty is going to be great. Verse 13, last verse. And company of two armies. Again, American Standard says, as upon the dance of Mahanaim. And so she is looked upon as those that looked upon here the dance of Mahanaim, whatever that was, again according to the pulpit commentary, and thought to be the name of a dance, perhaps one in which the inhabitants of Mahanaim expel, or this. And so, the second paragraph on that's what I would suggest we look at, because the person who made those notes obviously is going to have a better comment, right? Why could the expression not simply be a figurative enhancement of her presence, being impossible to ignore, and the amazement of her presence, her beauty, be comparable to the force of two armies approaching? That makes sense to me. That really does. All right, we're going to look, I think we're going to say 7 and 8 maybe for next Monday night. We're going to look at our study questions and make sure we're up to date on that. Let's take time to do that, if you don't mind. Today is June the 15th, 2026. Who ever heard of that? Gracious alive. Gracious, gracious. How far did we get on those? I forgot to mark mine. Did you get chapter 3, Amber? Which one? Down to number 21? Chapter 3. Okay, let's pick up at number 21 on chapter 23. Just to go back. Amber, you probably already have all yours answered. No, okay, well, let's look. Yeah, let's look. In chapter 3, verses 1 through 4, apparently the bride is relating a what? A dream, in which she's searching what? The city for the one that shows love. Verses 6 through 10 there describes who coming in his king, coming in his royal palanquin. I don't believe, is that word in our text? I don't believe it is it? Huh? In the New King James, okay. Yeah. That's his chariot. And he's escorted by how many valiant men? Yeah, 70. And they came with what to protect him? They had swords, didn't they? Dust rising from the traveling chariot is described as pillars of smoke. And so these identified in verse 7 are the king's bodyguard, and who are they then? They are the 60 valiant men, yeah. And secret service, there you go. Chapter 4 talks about the description of his bride. None is barren among them means that there's no, talking about no missing what? Teeth. Don't have to go to the dentist. Her neck is like the Tower of David. I mean, it's splendid in strength and ornament. Yeah, really is. Calling her sister, as he did in 9, 10, 12, and 5, and 1 and 2, does not mean biological sister, but an additional what? I put the word, huh? Yeah, I put closeness there, additional. You may have a better word. And so it says, my sisterly bride, a step beyond my, pulpit commentary says, a step beyond my betrothed. And verses 13, 14, number 28, she's described as a what? Enclosed, garden enclosed, as the what of his desires? The garden of his desires, filled with precious fruits, herbs, and spices. And number 29 says a well-protected garden is described as a garden enclosed. It's shut up, not available. Chapter 5. Bridegroom want to call on his spouse to admit him here. She hesitated. The king's joy, number 30, is complete. She is mine. And he exhorts his friends what? Eat, O friends, and drink, yea, drink abundantly. Really didn't mean to italicize all that, but I did. Number 31, briefly describe her dream. The dream, she hears the voice of her beloved. How about delay? Would that work? Delay is getting up. When she does get up, get to the door. Whoops, sorry about that. Get to the door, he is no longer there. She does what? Yes, searches for him. And when who found her? They did what? They smote her, didn't they? When the watchmen found her, they smote her. All right, here we go, number 32. She describes Solomon. And we're going to have to list the physical features that described him. This goes through number 11. She's white and what? Ruddy. Number 2, like the most fine gold. Head. Locks are bushy and black as raven. Number 4, eyes as the eyes of a dove. Something as a bed of spices, sweet flowers, cheeks, like lilies dropping with sweet smelling myrrh, has gold rings set with beryl, hands, is as bright ivory overlaid with sapphires. Now you got to give that Solomon credit. He had a belly, didn't he? As pillars of marble set upon sockets of fine gold. Yeah, wow. And as Lebanon, excellent as cedars, and that which is most sweet. Okay. Let's go ahead and we can get these others out in a couple of minutes. Countenance, yeah, countenance. Number 33, had gone down to feed among the lilies. Solomon. And something is a city of the tribe of Ephraim. Tirzah, what I forgot that anyway. Tirzah. Number 35, terrible as the army with banner, describes her beauty as overwhelming. Number 36, concerning the time of composition, the fact of 80 queens and 80 concubines, verse 8, reflects of his reign, earlier time of his reign, before he had how many wives? 700 and 300 concubines. All right. I'm going to give you my little test so when we come in next week, we can finish up. And when you go home next Monday morning, it'll be kaput. That means done. Ralph, I'll let you pad these out if you don't mind, my brother.
I find I have to keep telling myself that there's traditions of like courtship are really different than what we would be used to. You know, like the wedding, the long procession to a wedding.
Yeah.
It really kind of describes what we read tonight, I think.
Yeah.
The groom having to come and get her and
Yeah.
she's waiting there.
It was one more uptown deal, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I tried to put this in form where it'd be very